It's our annual event where we look at the Safer Waverley Partnership. So it does have a slightly different feel. In case I forget a bit later, I want to welcome Sam Adcock to the first meeting. You're very welcome, Sam. And hopefully you'll find the experience not too difficult, to say the least. If we can crack on then, please, because we are a couple of minutes late starting. Where we look at the Safer Waverley Partnership. Jerry? So it does have a slightly different feel. In case I forget a bit later, I want to welcome Sam Adcock to the first meeting. You're very welcome, Sam. And hopefully you'll find the experience not too difficult, to say the least. We've obviously got a problem of recording somewhere.
Yeah, I think there you are. It's just trying to mute the YouTube, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. If you've worked the technology, brilliant. Okay, so let's crack on then, please. So agenda item 1, minutes. Has everybody had time to go through the minutes? And if I go page by page, so page 1, is everyone happy? Page 2, the third page, page 4, and page 5. So if everybody's happy, we'll sign those as a correct account. Kim, any apologies for absence?
No, Chairman. Councillor Dixon has now joined us, so I believe we are all here.
Well, absolutely brilliant. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Kim, any declarations of interest?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions from member of the public, Kim?
None received, Chairman.
Good. I wish the rest of the agenda was normally this quick, but it's not. Questions from members?
None, Chairman.
Brilliant. Okay, something we can talk about, and that's the committee work programme. Louise, I think you'll be leading on this.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just very briefly, we've the work programme set out there, and you can see, all members can see what's currently on the agenda. And following that, for next year, we've only got a sort of 3 or so items, and some of those we're not quite sure at what stage they will be coming to this committee during the year. But this is an opportunity, members, to put forward ideas, anything that you've got some ideas about what the committee could add value to in the next year. This is your opportunity to sort of say if you've got some subjects at the moment that you would like us to either report on or investigate.
Okay, I can see one hand up. Councillor Wells.
Yeah, put the hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. I would very much like to suggest housing repairs.
That would go to, I would guess, the ONS housing, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Well,
Chairman. Yeah.
Would it? Oh, okay. Okay, I'm thinking of well-being from a well-being aspect, actually. But you know, if that's your view, then I must concur. But I feel community and well-being is not best served by housing repairs currently, and to keep it within housing might be not the best idea. But I bow to your judgment.
Okay, well, my view is it does sit within housing, but as we have on other things, if another overview and scrutiny feels that we can contribute and request that we send somebody on, and if you have an interest, then that's what we can do. And we've done this recently with Councillor Seaborn, made a request, and I think it primarily sits in their area, but if you have an interest, then there is nothing wrong to flag that interest so you can be involved. But I think it sits within their action plan. Councillor Dixon.
Yes, good evening. Sorry, I was having problems with my Zoom on entry, but we got here eventually. Yes, I was wondering, not sure this is on topic, but is it worth looking at any worsening situation with the mental health following the pandemic this year in our area? Would that be something worth looking at, or whether we've got the correct provision in place?
Well, actually, the exact same point I was going to raise in the corporate strategy, because although it's mentioned in brief, I, like you, have got concerns about mental health, and I'm not so sure within the strategy, the corporate strategy, it really goes into that. So can we hold that until we get into the corporate strategy, and Louise can maybe talk us through, because I think it's mentioned on page 56 of our papers, and then maybe we can go back, Councillor Dixon, to whether we need to have it specifically as a topic. I think it sits within our whole health and wellbeing strategy and everything else. And I'm sure Kelvin can talk a little bit about as well. But if we're not happy that it's highlighted as such an important issue, then we can specifically raise it as an action. Is that happy for a moment?
Sounds good. There was one other thing, is this maybe putting the cart before the horses, but looking at what we're going to be talking about later, I wonder whether at some point next year we should scrutinise what's going to happen to the collection which is currently in the building which we call Farnham Museum, because it looks like the two are parting company. But anyway, maybe that'll come up later as well.
There's a paper on that, and if we save it for that, and there's some recommendations, and again, if you don't feel the recommendations cover your concerns, then flag it up, and then we can slightly amend the recommendations. Anything else, Louise, that you want to raise at this early stage?
Not at this stage, Chairman, no, thank you.
Now, I think it's a living document, and it's a little bit flexible, I think, to say the least at the moment. I think it's right that we don't have too many items on it, because then we try and achieve everything, or put our efforts into trying to achieve everything and actually achieve nothing at all. So I think we want it as a slim document that we can really make some difference on. Has anybody else got any comments on that first item on the committee work programme? Okay, I'll take silence as an agreement. Okay, Safer Waverley Partnership, which is our main topic tonight. Before I hand over to Andrew to introduce it, can I just remind all members that this is about work with a partnership and not about policing issues within their ward. In the past, we do tend to go into specific items which aren't under the remit of the partnership. So we just need to make sure we're focused on their work. Andrew, shall I leave you to introduce your team tonight?
I can do, Chairman. I think really we have the chair of the Safe Waverley Partnership here and also the vice chair. So I would really want to hand over to them to introduce this item, if that's all right.
No, absolutely fine.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Chairman. My name is Helen Milton and I'm the chair of the Safer Waverley Partnership. Previous to that, I was the vice chair. And in my day job, I am the designated nurse safeguarding adults across all of the Surrey CCGs. And I've got my vice chair as well on here. So we're going to sort of do a bit of a double act. I don't know what you want me to do. Do you want me to sort of talk through roughly some of these priorities, or do I assume people have read papers and just answer questions? What's the easiest way to do this?
I always think it's worthwhile, bearing in mind that this is a meeting that the public can watch on YouTube, to give an overview on what the partnership does and what work you're actually doing. I know some of the members here do have specific questions, though Councillor Rubini regarding rural crime, and I've got a couple of questions about the action plan. So I think for the public, it is worthwhile giving an overview of what it does, a little bit about it, why it was set up, and what you hope to achieve as a partnership.
Yeah, okay. I haven't got all the documents in front of me, but the Safer Waverley Partnership obviously covers the Waverley area, and it is, as it says on the tin, a partnership. Our particular one is very well represented across a whole stream of different disciplines, and as I said, the statutory partners. And the idea is to look at priorities to keep the public safe, and also trying to work in with that some of the priorities from other partner agencies, so the Health and Wellbeing Board, for instance, the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office. Certainly a lot of the health priorities are included within these priorities, and I know a lot of the police's are. We're obviously looking at some of the things that most people be very well aware of, so domestic abuse, serious organised crime, and that would include things like county lines, for example. We also looked through serious organised crime and the joint action group, prioritising areas. So, for instance, in the past, we know this time running up to Christmas, there's sort of burglaries and thefts of people looking for Christmas presents, that sort of thing. So it's trying to focus on areas that we could look at. If I just sort of go through the priorities, we've got 3 main priorities, but they sort of a catch-all of lots of things. So one of them is obviously the threat and harm, risk and vulnerabilities. So we're looking at domestic homicide and domestic abuse on this one. We have sadly now had 6 domestic homicides within our area. 3 of them are still, 2 of them are still yet to be published. But from that, we are again trying to learn lessons, work out what happened to this crisis, and then try and prevent happening again. And it is a very multi-agency process. Linked to that, one of my other roles, I co-chair the Domestic Homicide Oversight Group, and that's where we try to collate all the lessons learned and recommendations from domestic homicides across Surrey. You won't be surprised to know that they sort of have a general themes amongst them, and also try not to repeat recommendations with new homicides, because if we're repeating the recommendation, clearly something's not working. So we're trying to really consolidate that as a learning piece, and as I said, that is very multi-agency, and there's all the details there on the plan. Child exploitation, we've seen a lot of that in the media of late, and just linked to that, we've got modern slavery as well. FGM covers within there too. And this partnership has recently contributed money to some YouTube films around modern slavery and cookering. And cookering, for those that don't know, is where people sort of befriend somebody and then sort of take over their home, normally for criminal activity. We've got serious organised crime there, the prevention of terrorism, so that's the Prevent programme that is run by the government, and again all partners are involved in that. We all contribute to the channel panels if we need to. We make sure everybody's got up-to-date training, and certainly from a CCG point of view, we have to submit quarterly returns to NHS England about training figures and any alerts that have been made, and that we obviously share with our partners. So I'm just going through the thing there. Again, community harm, I've just missed the title of that one. So it's identifying and tackling crime and antisocial behaviour with the hotspots. So there's a lot of overlap across these. And again, I want to reiterate, that it is a partnership. So it's not just us sitting at the table or, Waverley Borough Council doing all of this. Within this, we've got the partnership intelligent forms that have had widespread publicity across a number of groups. They've come to the community safety partnerships. I've publicised them widely within the health, the CCGs and the hospital trusts. So we've had lots of work there. Now, an interesting one is on here, I'm just going to find it, around speeding and sort of car related parking and speeding. And this came out of public meetings last year. Obviously we haven't had any this year because of COVID, and a lot of the public within Waverley were concerned about speeding and illegal, or what's the word I'm looking for, parking issues, inconsiderate parking. Now, interestingly, when we looked at the evidence, that didn't actually support it, but because so many members of the public really highlighted this as a concern, we have added it to the plan. And obviously Surrey Police are doing a lot of work with that, as well as Surrey Fire and Rescue. I think that's probably a bit of an overview. I'm happy to take questions, and I'm just trying to move my screen back on. And Tom is also here to take any questions.
Yeah, so before we put it to the members, anybody else from the Safer Partnership wishes to give any more information, or Katrina or Eve, please shout before I open it up to the committee members.
Yeah, Chair, if I may, it's Tom Budd here from
Hello, Tom.
Hello. I just thought I'd just put a bit of context around sort of some of the partnership mechanisms that we've got within the Safer Waverley Partnership to show, you know, how we are tackling some of those issues and priorities in the plan. So we've got three main mechanisms in terms of what we use. So the first is called a JAG, or a joint action group, and the purpose of the JAG is it's mainly sort of set up to deal with problems, sort of hotspots and locations. They can be nominated in any number of ways, you know, through the JAG referral process. It can come in from, you know, local councillors, individual agencies, and the idea of the JAG is they would be expected to then look at that from a partnership perspective and problem solve it with a desired outcome in terms of some sort of reduction. Alongside the JAG, to deal with people, is what we call the CHARM, which looks at sort of individuals that may be causing a disproportionate impact on the local community, or one particular agency. There might be some mental health concerns in there, and that's and again, the purpose of the CHARM is to look at providing a problem-solving multi-agency approach to either, you know, reduce offending or ensure that a particular individual has been provided with, you know, appropriate safeguarding and help. And then the final one is a more recent one, and I'll get Sam, you know, a little bit later if necessary, to give it more context around some of the work she's done to revamp all of these processes and make them more sort of fit for purpose, is what we call SOC-JAG, Serious Organised Crime Joint Action Group. And that specifically focuses on action plans around some of the sort of serious organised crime that Helen has alluded to, like, you know, your modern slavery, your county lines drug dealing, and looking at ways as a partnership we can work together to combat that and keep the public safe.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Anything else before I open it up to members? Is there anything? Okay. Either put your hand up physically, or you can do the hand up on the machine. I did see Councillor Else had a hand up, and I know Councillor Rubini has got his hand up as well. So Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. So my question is a very, very basic one at this point, and that is, there's a theme running through your presentation here that I've on the papers, and that is one of communication. And I wonder how you're managing this. My understanding is that the communication of your work, which I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever, is completely invaluable and very well worthwhile. But how are you communicating this, for example, to our parish councils? Because I'm a ward councillor for a village. My parish clerk isn't aware of the level of work that you engage with, and I have no doubt you send emails. I don't know that you do, but I'm presuming that you do. But how have you approached this engagement, which you must do? At the moment, we don't have a great deal of engagement with community safety in the villages. We don't have a police presence. You know, we used to always have a police man or a PCSO, policewoman, anybody from the police at all parish council meetings, for example, and we don't see that anymore. There used to be regular communications to the parish council. There isn't that element anymore. And what I think I'm asking is, you know, how are you going to improve on this? I do believe there is an improvement required with regard to your communication. So I've no doubt I'll have something else I want to ask later on, but that's the basic for me. I know all the work you're doing, brilliant stuff. I hear about it, but how do you get this through to, you know, other levels of governance? Thank you.
No, I think that's a very fair question, and we're actually in the process. I'm going to ask Katrina to come and step in here in a minute of actually having a communications protocol. So if Katrina, I'm sure she's on the line, if she could.
Yeah.
There you are.
Yes, at the we had a members briefing back in January, and this was again flagged up then about the need to promote the successes of the partnership. So what the Safer Waverley Partnership have agreed to do is come up with a joint media communication strategy, which basically brings all the communications officers from each of the organisations together to look at who can be this sort of spokesman for the partnership, who will lead and what communications, and the processes for that. Obviously, that has slightly gone on the back burner in the event of COVID, but we are looking to try and agree who will take the lead on the communications for the partnership. With regard to the parish councils, again, that was another area that was flagged up to look at. We have had more involvement in recent months with some of the towns and parishes, but we do acknowledge that is an area where we need to bring them in a bit more, and hopefully when we're reviewing some of the groups like the Joint Action Group, which does discuss the problem locations, hopefully we can look to invite members of the parish councils as and when we've got a problem. Certainly in some of the location hotspot groups we've had, we have had members of the parish councils attend those groups and help us problem solve the area. But yeah, we're looking at involving them more, hopefully in the future, as and when we look to review the groups.
Okay, thank you, Katrina. I mean, last year we talked about publicising the success, but I think the point Councillor Else has made, and actually I'd written down that point, was about liaison with the ward member. So that's not about the success or communicating, it's speaking to the ward member, because often the ward member has a lot of contacts and a lot of local knowledge. So it's that bringing it down before you've got the success and everything else, that liaison, and like you say, hopefully inviting where applicable to JAG, accepting sometimes there are things you cannot say because they're sensitive, or they're sensitive because it's person specific for charm. Totally accepting all of that. I think it's the liaising with the ward members, because there's nothing worse when something is happening and you do not know. So although last year, because of a number of reasons, we haven't really progressed that as an action point, I think it will be one that will be closely looked at this year for the liaison bit. So thank you for that. Councillor, does that answer your question? I think I've lost her.
Oh dear.
I know her call was breaking up earlier on. We'll move on and we can always come back and ask. Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just back up what you were just saying about the other question. I noticed on Facebook a couple of weeks ago that there were several car crimes in my ward and area, and unfortunately I'd had nothing from the police to tell me about it. I did answer those questions on Facebook, because I do try and defend the police and ask people to report it, etc., etc. So knowledge is very much a power, and I think we need a lot more of it, particularly from that communication from police, what's happening in our wards and areas. Anyway, my question is based around rural crime.
Chair,
as we all know that.
If I may just interject, just to provide Councillor Rubini with some reassurance around the communication issue.
Sorry, I can't see who I've got.
Sorry, it's Tom
Is that you,
Butcher.
Tom? All
Yeah.
right, I've got so many screens, I couldn't work out who it was. Thank you.
Apologies if I may just interject,
Of
and
course you can.
just to provide sort of obviously answer the specific question that both Councillor Earls and Councillor Rabini have raised around sort of engagement and being kept up to date, particularly in relation to obviously some crime issues that they've both articulated. I know obviously Sam has recently taken up post, and one of our sort of key priorities is to be looking at improving that level of sort of engagement and communication. So I would just, if it's okay, just ask Sam to just give a little bit of an overview of what she's got planned in terms of how she's going to improve that.
No, go ahead, Sam.
Hello, good evening, and to all of those that I haven't met, thank you for having me. Okay, so since taking post, we've been lucky enough to increase our numbers of officers. So we've gone from having 2 officers to 4, which means that I can now dedicate 1 officer to each area, which means that I'm hoping that you should start to see your officers more. And my aim is that everybody should know who their local police officers are. So we're actually doing a relaunch video as well. It's being filmed the beginning of December to be released in January, which will have all of my new officers, including myself and all my PCSOs, introducing the team to everybody. And I'll be sharing that with yourselves and encouraging you to share that with whoever you think would benefit from that. And we'll be putting that on our Facebook accounts and Twitter, etc. So I think it's great that the Surrey Police are and are continuing to invest in neighbourhood policing, and I hope that you will start to see your officers a little bit more, and I certainly want to know if you're not. Yes, once you get this video, you will know who your officers are, and I will be expecting that communication to be, for them to be communicating with you. And absolutely, that is one of my, I've set myself some goals, new in post, and that is one of my top things is to improve engagement, not only with our communities, but with our partners as well.
Councillor Rubini, I know you've got a specific question, so if you want to go on to that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that both. It does reassure me. Can I now ask a question about rural crime? About 2 months ago, I think it was, there was a lot of talk on television and radio about the upsurge of rural crime and how farmers, etc., were disheartened on the amount of crime that they were being targeted for. I know vehicles, Land Rovers, that sort of thing, rustling. There's a lot of it going on. And I spoke to PCC and the Chief Constable at some of the meetings, and they assured me that they were tackling that crime and everything was being put in order with dedicated officers to have a look at rural crime. As you all know, Waverley is probably one of the largest rural areas in Surrey. And as far as I'm aware, that crime will still be prevalent in our area. However, when I speak to officers about the crime, I find it very difficult to know, because in fact they find that officers are finding it difficult to decide what is a rural crime, and in fact are putting it in different boxes. So how do we tackle the crime if in fact we don't know what it is, or where it is, or how much of it is going on? Now what I'd like to do is try and get some reassurance that the crime stats are starting to follow rural crime, and some identification of what a rural crime actually is, so that we can tackle it. That's the basis of my question. Thank you.
I think that's going to be for Tom or Sam to answer.
Yeah, without going into too much detail, but yes, if you would, please, Tom.
Yeah, because I mean, I'll give an initial sort of force overview, and Sam can talk about a little bit more about the local context. So, yeah, Councillor Rubini is absolutely right, and I think this is an area, of concern for us. And we need to improve. Certainly, our identification of what is a rural crime, has been a little bit wanting in the past. It's what we call a flagging issue. So when a crime is reported on our crime recording system, there is a dedicated flag that gets ticked by the person recording the crime to say that it fits into one of the sort of 4 rural crime categories around agricultural, equestrian, wildlife, etc. if that flag is inappropriately ticked, that crime category, no matter what it is, would get marked up as a rural crime. So there is a training issue that we have identified with our officers and staff in terms of recording that crime. We're still working through that training package as we speak, and obviously COVID has had a bit of an impact on that. But it is obviously a priority for the PCC, and with that, in mind, each borough now does have a dedicated rural crime PCSO. You've got Dave Boxall for Waverley, additionally supported by 2 dedicated rural crime police constables, and their job is to look at all the patterns around rural crime, and actually we then develop and carry out some proactive operations targeting those involved in rural crime. What I want to do is I think probably at the next one of these we'll be in a better position to give a true picture of the rural crime levels within the borough and across the force, and give you some reassurance that we are understanding exactly what our rural crime is. We've carried out a full problem solving plan, which is the whole purpose of this meeting is to look at the activity of the partnership, so it won't be just what the police are doing but what the community safety partnership are doing as a whole. I mean, Sam, did you want to add anything in terms of sort of locally what's going on with Waverley in terms of rural crime at the moment?
Yeah, I'll just echo what Mr. Budd has said, that we did find that there were some housekeeping issues which did mean that people were ticking the rural crime box when perhaps it wasn't a rural crime. So we have identified that, and as Mr. Budd said, we have given training to our officers so that they're aware of what a rural crime is, especially those officers working in Waverley. It's key that they know what that is. And yes, I review every crime in the morning, especially rural crime, and I allocate that to the rural PCSO, which is PCSO Boxall. And I've asked him to start creating his own spreadsheets and data so that he can start to identify trends and see where we need to dedicate our resources. So we did have a rural crime week, which was going to be this week, but of course with the lockdown we've had to put everything on the back burner, especially anything face to face. So that would have involved saddle marking, going up to our crime prevention advice on very rural locations. There was lots of activities that were in place, which rest assured it's all there, the planning's done, so we will pick that back up when we can and when it's safe to do so.
Thank you for those answers. Can I just very quickly come back that, yes, I was looking at it in a partnership context, and I would like to see it picked up by the partnership or other areas. For example, I know there used to be some successful farm watches, neighbourhood watch, etc., that helped the police and the partnerships on this type of crime. And going back to the first thing, they relied totally on information going to them, because you have a lot of eyes and ears out there and very supportive people that would support us. So thank you very much for that, and hopefully it will improve for the future. Thank you.
Okay, I've got some points, but as people shout if they've got points before I get to mine, please.
I've got Councillor Mirrlees and Councillor Dixon, Chairman.
Okay, in that order then, please, Kika.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say to Inspector Sam Adcock, we did have a rape in Farnham and it was classified as a rural crime, which is absolutely astonishing. And really, when I feel that, I mean, I live in Farnham and I have horses that are in a very rural area. And the sort of general feeling has been that the police don't care and they're not around. So we really do need to up the ante on this, because I think they feel pretty disenfranchised by the whole thing. Thanks. And I would hope that obviously a rape would not be put down as a rural crime again.
No, absolutely. And that formed part of our training. Clearly, that's not going to fall into that category. And yes, you're quite right, that shouldn't happen. And I would hope that that wouldn't happen again. I'll certainly be keeping an eye on that, because, you know, it needs to be correct what we're doing.
Thank you.
I just wonder, Sam, whether within or Helen, within this action plan, clearly it's been a big concern so far about rural crime, whether we should have something about the partnership approach to rural crime, because there is a lot that can be done as a partnership. And I think that way it enables us to monitor it, because we have as a, we have a statutory responsibility to review the Safer Waverley Partnership. So if I leave that one with you, that may be to add something about rural crime. I will come back to the general action plan in a minute, but Councillor Dixon, I think, had a hand up patiently.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just two very quick points. Firstly, to Inspector Sam, just to add the thing about the communications. You can imagine, I was doing a school run the day before yesterday, turned right from the end of my road, and there was a sign up saying, "Call the police, there was a murder here." And I hadn't heard nothing at all about a murder in, Heath End, except for this board that appeared up asking. So that would have been useful, because if anybody asks me, I don't know what happened. I know there's a very bad car accident down there as well. Second point I wanted to bring up is, I did think in your report you mentioned under the COVID thing, the scams and the fraudsters and the increase in fraud and cybercrime that we've seen. I did have a look at the partnership. We've got nothing, although we've got a section on organised crime, there's nothing at all on pensions fraud or similar types of financial fraud, which our residents are particularly, they can become, receive numerous calls from people trying to extract money from themselves or from their pensions. And I thought perhaps that might be something that we might want to include. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
I think what I can do, certainly Trading Standards have done a big awareness campaigns about scams over the last 18 months or so. But for your point and the point about rural crime, this plan, or this action plan, it's not set in stone. It is a live document. So what I suggest is I put those both on the agenda for our next partnership meeting, and the discussion as to whether to put them on the plan or not. But I'm very happy to do that, because it is a live document. It's not just going to sit there for a year or 3 years. I think some of the partnerships are. So I'm very happy to do that.
Okay, if I've just got a...
When is the next partnership meeting? Sorry.
We have only just had one, so it will be January.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you. If you would consider putting pension fraud, that kind of thing on the agenda.
Yeah, sort of scams generally, I think
Yes.
we can
Yes,
probably do. We'll discuss it at the next partnership.
Can I just add something very quickly about scams?
Yep.
We have hundreds and hundreds of very, very useful information booklets at Waverley Borough Council offices. So if anybody would like some to be able to give out to any of their local communities, then please do get in contact with me, and I'm more than happy to share those with you. They're really quite helpful booklets with some tips and hints. But yes, please do get in contact with me.
Okay, thank you.
Just to pick up on Sam's point there, we have been trying to distribute the, I think it's called the Big Book of Scams, isn't it, Sam? Those booklets that the sort of community group set up to look at the COVID situation. So we've been trying to sort of distribute them via those community groups. We've been doing quite a lot to promote awareness of scams, especially during lockdown, because there has been an increase in scams nationally and locally. We're looking at different ways we can work with the day centres. We have done quite a lot historically, but obviously it's quite hard to get in there during the current restrictions. And last year we did have a scams awareness night at one of the day centres, which we're hoping to repeat. So we have done quite a lot about scams, but obviously there's so many different scams out there. We just try and sort of highlight awareness of the ones that we can. And as I say, Sam's got the book with the most common ones in. And we've also done some work on identifying loan sharks, and there's training available to sort of frontline staff that might be able to work to identify who might be victims of loan sharks in the communities. So that's something else that's closely related to scams that we've been looking at.
Okay, thank you, Katrina. I've just got a couple of issues. Firstly, about the JET team, which is obviously a joint enforcement team. I know it's mostly police and council, but it obviously can have trading standards, fire and rescue and everything else. And maybe a point for Andrew or Kelvin. I can't remember the last time we have had any updates on what they've done, what their workload is, what areas they've tackled, have they had successes. I think it's probably about 2 years since I've had an update on the JET team. And knowing how much it costs to set it up, it would be really good for the next meeting. And I'm not sure which one of you gentlemen, Andrew, whether it'll be yourself, I would like us to have an update, because that is a partnership approach and we have no idea.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'll take that up with our Director, Annie Wrighton, and see. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think we called it the Joint Enforcement Initiative. So whether that means it's not quite a team as such, but I'll take it offline with Annie and we will come back with a report in the next meeting, Chairman. That's fine. Yeah,
whether it's a team or not, it's actually what does it contribute towards enforcement and partnership and everything else. And Annie, I'll be grateful, some sort of update. So that's my first point. Just a couple of questions, whether Helen's probably the best person to answer. Last year, when we had this process, it was mentioned about the mental health team and the lack of attendance at the meetings. And I wondered whether in the 12 months, have they contributed more to the partnership and actually attended meetings when asked?
Do you mean attending the CHARM meetings?
Yeah, the CHARM.
I haven't had any feedback, I must be honest.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I might better say that as the chair of CHARM, or at least the chair of CHARM until January, when Inspector Sam Adcock will be taking over. If I can just sort of comment in sort of parenthesis, we've had a number of meetings with Sam. I've sat down with Tom, and there is a new wind blowing in the borough, and it's very good. And we're seeing, some really concerted effort to improve, to increase the numbers of police, to look at these groups that sit underneath the partnership, the JAG, the CHARM, the SOC, to see how they can be more effective. One good thing from lockdown, as the chair of CHARM, is that we are getting partners coming because they can zoom in. So for months and months, it was incredibly difficult to get any buy-in at all from the mental health teams. And most of the people who feature on the CHARM agenda will have some kind of mental health issue and are probably known by the mental health services. And there was a gaping hole in the kind of work we could do, working with partners, because we didn't have that input. Now, those involved with those particular people can zoom in for half an hour at the beginning of the agenda. We can deal with those. So the mix of live people around the table and zooming in means now that we do get just about everybody we need to each CHARM meeting. So that's been a great improvement.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I've just got a couple of issues with the action plan, and probably I'll just generalise my concerns. I don't think the action plan is particularly, smart, if you want to use the mnemonic. It's not particularly specific. It says things like reduce levels of AS being the most prolific, but we don't know if it's happened. How can we measure it? What success? And I know Andrew and Kelvin will both know from my past how many times I have said to them, so what does that mean? What does success? So is it to reduce? If so, by what? How are you going to measure it? The problem I have is looking at this, it's great in what it's trying to achieve. But if I was looking at this and saying, so have you actually succeeded? Where's your success? And how can you show that success? I'm not sure you can with the way it's worded.
So do we need a sort of a test of effectiveness column as well then? Would that be that way we're headed?
It's really just using the sort of smart, I know some people use smarter, but the smart mnemonic, if you're going to reduce incidents, are you going to reduce them by 5%? So you know how you can measure it because you've got the previous year's measurement. So you've got a measurement of success. At the moment, I would say a lot of it, you couldn't see whether you've been successful or will be successful. I'm sure Tom and Sam have had SMART objectives throughout their career in the police. I know I did. And it's all about what exactly is expected, i.e. 10% reduction. How are you going to measure that? What is success? And I can't see that within that document. And I think if you wanted to justify the worth and value of the partnership, actually you do it by your results. So I do think it just needs a little bit of work just to tighten that up.
Okay, I'm quite happy to take that, and we'll work on that for next time.
I'm more than happy to be, if you want to have a meeting or something. Normally I'd say, well, I'll just meet you at the offices and sit down and go through it, but we can't. But I'd be more than happy to, just Zoom or whatever, just to say, does it really fit what we need? Because we have like I say, legal responsibility to check your performance. And it's quite difficult, if I'm honest. Okay. So if you need any help, just shout. Just one other point, the action plan talks about reviewing police licensing resource in Waverley. What does that look like, and is it likely to happen? I'm not sure who's the best to answer that.
Probably Sam.
Yes, sorry. What part of where are you looking at?
I've got to go through it all now. Hang on. Louise, you might have it more to your fingertips. I'd have to go through the whole document, and it's about 40 pages.
It's page 32, I think.
It's under alcohol-related crime and antisocial behaviour.
Yeah, the top of page 32.
Top of page 32.
2020-2021 Partnership Action Plan. This is something the old borough inspector came up with just before he departed, that he committed to looking at this. So I don't know if Sam's got an update on that.
I don't really understand what the issue would have been, because
I don't think Waverley ever had a licensing officer.
Oh, I see. Okay, I see.
To Waverley, they shared one with other boroughs.
Yes, and that hasn't changed. We do share a licensing officer with another borough, but I have been in contact with them, and they are very active, especially through COVID with breaches, etc. So, and they're always on the end of the phone for me to report anything to them. So, I'm happy that they're doing everything that we need them to be doing in the borough.
And I've got one final question, and can I just say well done to Eve, because I have never been in a meeting where Eve hasn't spoken. So a very first. It's lovely to see you, but you've been very quiet tonight. Just a point about young people, and I wonder how we're as a partnership, where we're going to engage with the young people and get their views and what their concerns are. Obviously, we have universities which are slightly older, but also the sort of school age. I just wonder whether how we're going to engage as a partnership.
Shall I start this one off? Because I know the police have done a lot of work with schools, but I'll let them talk about that. So as a partnership, we funded some skate events last summer with our leisure team. And to that we invited Crime Stoppers, who are running a campaign to engage with young people. They also came to some of the Friday night projects that we've got up and running. We've obviously run road use awareness days, and the fire service are obviously doing their Safe Drive Stay Alive. We do fund some support for children of domestic abuse victims. So we've given them the outreach service some funding to work with young people who might be victims of domestic abuse. And also the Joint Action Group has given some money to the Trinity Trust Youth Outreach Team, who are going out patrolling 3 nights a week in some of the hotspot areas that experience antisocial behaviour, to try and engage with the young people hanging around. And I think Surrey County Council, I think Louise is here, she might be able to update on some of the work that Surrey are doing with young people in regards to junior citizens online work. And they've also done some studies on, I think, on sort of targeted youth work and youth violence. So I don't know if the police in Surrey want to come in and say a bit about what they've been doing.
It's more about the partnership rather than individual organisations, to make sure that we as a partnership are engaging with the youth. And I know each organisation is doing some tremendous work, but it's how as a partnership, the Safer Waverley partnership, are we engaging? Because otherwise we get back into the silo. The police will be doing their bits, Surrey County Council do their work, and never the twain shall meet. Now, it might be one that just to consider at your next meeting of, is there ways of engaging more with as a partnership with the young people? That might be the next stage of it. Okay, Sam, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, just to say, a good piece of partnership working in relation to the youth was the Farncombe Task and Finish group, where there was a lot of work that went in around how do we engage and reduce the ASB by, getting the kids involved in something different. So there was a lot of work that went in before lockdown around, there was go-karting, a local go-karting team that were going to help teach mechanics. There was a cafe that were going to open. There was some local volunteers that were going to go out and with youth workers and engage with the youth that way. So as with everything, COVID put a stop to that, but all the plans are in place for us to restart that again, and that was partnership working through the Task and Finish group.
I mean, that's very impressive. But I say the issue for me and probably some of the committee members is this really impressive work we don't know about. And I think that's a shame for the partnership, which I think is obviously got some strong members and actually achieving some really good results. So I think it goes back to our first point. Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Chair. One very quick one, then a question. But the quick one is an acronym, etc. What is a channel panel? Didn't mean anything to me. It's mentioned several times. It's on page 25, on the 5th paragraph. No channel panel cases to date in Waverley. I just wondered what it meant.
That's the panel where people that have been referred through the Prevent programme. Are you familiar with the Prevent programme?
Yep.
Yeah. So if someone's been identified as possibly being at risk of radicalisation, they will be referred with their permission to the channel panel, and then partners in that panel work around strategies to anti-radicalise them, for want of a better explanation.
Okay, thanks for that. I won't ask what it actually stands for. The channel doesn't bring that to mind, but there we are. My main question is on page 28. We're talking about alcohol-related crime, etc., and how ASB has been reduced by 5%. However, it says alcohol-related crime is up 27.8% from 227 to 290. Now, obviously, as a partnership, I can't see an explanation of what the actually alcohol-related crime is. I mean, are we talking about drunk drivers, or is there any particular thing behind that the partnership should be looking at besides ASB, which of course is something we would always look at?
So which page was that, 28?
Yes, page 28. It's on the 5th column along, on the top.
Oh, I wonder if my page is a bit different to yours.
Yes, it's it's the end of year progress.
Okay, number 8.
Your second page, I think it is, Helen.
So if I said the other page 8, it's got a little 8 on it. Would that be the page?
Yes, it's page 8 of the partnership report.
It says from 2019-2020 partnership action plan. So it's the end of year. So it should be a result now, I would have thought.
Page 22.
Yeah, I know that's the forward, but shouldn't we have a result for? I just wondered what the alcohol-related crime was.
Yeah, I don't know how the police classify that. What constitutes that?
I can come in there, Chair, if I may. So obviously this is from the sort of financial year that we've just had. So alcohol related crime, it can be any crime type, so the alcohol is a factor. So it can encompass, for example, your obvious ones like your drink driving, but it can also encompass assaults, etc., anything where drink is a factor, whether it be the suspect or victim are under the influence of alcohol.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions from anybody else?
Councillor Forojewski had her hand up.
Yes, I didn't see it. Thank you, Councillor Forojewski.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and good evening, everyone. I'm new to this committee, so please forgive me if some of my comments or questions are a bit odd. What I just wanted to ask, so I was really pleased to see about the parking, the inconsiderate parking being in the plan. And I was interested to hear what Helen said with regards to the evidence base. And coming back to your point, Chairman, about measuring success, if we are now going to try and curb some inappropriate parking, we have a particular issue in Cranley where people are parking on double yellow lines, they're parking on zigzag lines, they're parking in the lay-by where the bus is just outside Sainsbury's. It's a daily occurrence because there's no controls or constrictions for people not to do that. I think it's become a normal habit now for people just to pull up, get out, go and do their shopping, come back whilst the buses can't park, and so forth and so forth. But your point about, if we're going to be looking at that, your point about measuring success would be an interesting one to actually validate what you are saying there. And when we talk about partnership, we're all involved, we're all partners in the greater scheme of things, and we all have our part to play. And I was just wondering, when it comes to things like the scam brochures, was they're at Waverley office, is there an electronic version? And how much of social media are we using in this day and age to actually get the word out there to a bigger audience? Most of the councillors will have a Facebook page, we can share information, we can do all sorts of things, but nothing ever comes my way with regards to being able to share information that's perhaps coming from the partnership or could be useful to other people. So I think that's a way we can look at perhaps on the next partnership meeting about the use of social media and how we can make it more effective in terms of the number of councillors who do have a Facebook page. So I'll leave it there for now, Chairman, but thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I'm looking across the number of screens. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay, if I can just finish off, Helen, Tom, the team, Sam, thank you for your presentation. Hopefully some of our concerns can be woven into next year's plan. We do have a recommendation for our committee members, which is on our page 15. I'll read the recommendation if it saves you trying to find it. So it's recommended that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee are asked to note the Safer Waverley Partnership Plan 2019-20 and associated activity undertaken from April 2019 to March 2020 and the focus of work since April 2020 and the impact on COVID-19 on the Safer Waverley Partnership. Is everybody happy to support that recommendation? Yep. Thank you, everybody. You are welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. I know what I would do if I was in your position. So thank you for your time, thank you for your attendance, and we look forward to see some more great work in the next year. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much for inviting us, and your constructive criticism is really helpful, and we will take that on board and weave them in, but I won't stay for the rest of the meeting, but thank you anyway.
Okay, well, thank you anyway. Right, if we can move on to make sure we get back on track. Item 8, which is the Leisure Centre update. Kelvin, you've given us numerous updates, so I'm not expecting you to go through the complete history. Just really the updates on the updates, if you would, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. One element, obviously, the leisure investments themselves are currently on hold as we and the industry, the leisure industry, look at how COVID will impact that service going forward. Our leisure centres are currently closed at the moment as part of lockdown 2, as I'm sure you're all aware. But I just thought it might be useful just to give you a quick update, up until in September, August, September and October, when we've been open, we've been operating ahead of the forecast. So there had been really good positive response from the users returning to the leisure centres. And we had pleasing figures of 51,000, over 51,000 attending sites during October. So we really hope after lockdown 2 that we can relook at the marketing programme, but hopefully we can have a successful leisure centre operation going forward. So that was it really, Chairman. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
No, I just think for this committee, sort of the wellbeing issues for our communities are huge with the leisure centres. Accepting that between meetings there may not be a lot of update, I would still like you to give, even if the update is there is no update, because it's such an important issue. But I will open it up now to the committee members for any questions they wish to ask. Councillor Forojewski.
Once again, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I absolutely endorse your comments there with regards to the leisure centres. It was such a bitter blow to the leisure centres this last lockdown. It really was. I mean, I'm so proud of the Cranley Leisure Centre, because they've done everything in their power to get up and running, get back to business. They made people feel safe. They were doing really, really well. People like me who were hesitant about returning suddenly found that actually it was working, and I was very comfortable going back to the gym. And it was, as I say, a bitter blow that they've had this, they've had to close once again. So it's a comment more than anything, it's an observation more than anything, just to say, I hope we can get back, the leisure centres can get back to some sort of normality as soon as able to do so, because it is so critical to the health and well-being of a nation, of all generations who really use these facilities. And especially, forgive me for going on about Cranley, but I know Cranley is one of these sites that we need to be looking at, because it needs its investment and it needs to be upgraded and so forth. But we really need to be pushing leisure as a means of health and well-being. We touched on it earlier about mental health. Well, gyms and other facilities, leisure centres, play a big part in the recovery, and there's going to be a lot of recovery to do. So I think they're critical to the community for the health and well-being of its residents. So thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I echo all your points. It's not just about physical, it's the mental improvements as well. So I echo every point. Any other questions from our committee members to Kelvin? No, thank you very much, Kelvin. So we'll move on to agenda item 9, please, which is the update on Farnham Museum. Charlotte Hall, I see you're with us. Welcome again. We have had this several times because we were taking a keen interest to assist the executive in some decisions. So the floor is yours, Charlotte. I think you're on mute, Charlotte.
Sorry. Thank you, Chairman. So this report follows on from the report that we brought to this committee back in June, where, just to summarise, members expressed support for repairing Wilmer House, which is the building synonymous with Farnham Museum service and collection. There was report for repairing it, recognising the building was of important historic status. But the committee were also of the view that it should remain protected in Waverley's custody, even if no longer appropriate as a home for the museum. But all that given, open to or accepting of the view that there could be alternative uses for Wilmer House, and that should be explored. Alongside an investigation of different service models and possible locations for the museum service and collection. So that was really the view that we took from the committee and from members back in June. And then in the intervening months between then and now, we have, as officers, looked at worked closely with our finance and estate teams to try and identify a capital budget for the repair works to ideally be able to be in a position to commence them in January. But as I'm sure you can understand, this has been proven to be very, very difficult as a result of the council's deficit that we've accrued as a result of COVID. Equally, we've looked at external funding, and I think the same can be said there, where in the short term, this is going to be really challenging, but not implausible as an option for the longer term. And in fact, I've had discussions with stakeholders, with people in the sector just last week, and I think there is a lot of interest around this particular situation that Farnham finds itself in. So that's sort of where we've got a short-term challenge, and we really feel that in order for the council to make a careful and considered judgment, that we would like to bring this paper, which seeks an agreement in principle to be able to explore the potential for developing the museum service for Farnham as a freestanding entity that's independent of Wilmer House, so that basically we can look at both the service and collection and the museum and the building issues as separate entities, so that we can try and really establish or best understand the positive outcomes for both. So at the same time as doing this piece of work, the council's property advisory and investment board have commissioned Montague Evans to provide an independent options appraisal for the building, looking at possible alternative uses that have the potential to deliver a greater financial return for the council. The findings of this appraisal should be known in December, and they will of course be reported and reviewed to the council in due course, and the finance and estates team are leading on that element. So this paper really is regarding sort of next steps for the museum service and the collection, and we're asking really in the recommendations that that members of the committee give us really a mandate to explore, consult and test the viability of different options for the service and the collection, and that importantly this review has a comprehensive understanding of the costs and the logistics associated with the museum collection, which I think Councillor Dixon sort of rightly alluded to, because that is a really important sort of element of the whole sort of situation. We have a legal duty of care for that collection, and there is quite an onerous ethical framework that you have to follow to sort of dispose or do anything with that collection. So it's really, we think this is a detailed piece of work that needs to look at options going forward, that we can bring to members for you to consider, for you to scrutinise and review, and that within those options there is real consideration and appreciation given to things like what we do with the collection, storage of the collection, because there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from other boroughs, other places that have gone through similar approaches, and have found that there are pitfalls along the way. So we're proposing really that we come back potentially really in January with perhaps an outline for what that review might look like, get agreement for the approach that we should take, and then ideally bringing those findings back either in sort of March or June for sort of further consideration. I think in the report we also allude to the fact that we think this might or could benefit from some additional resource, potentially to buy in a bit of external advice from the museum sector. And anything that we do, I think we would want to do with Farnham Maltings in terms of a consultation with them as sort of key stakeholders. So it's really to ask for your views on the recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. I'll come to Councillor Miralese in a second. I think the approach of splitting the museum and the building is absolutely the right one, because there are issues to be resolved about the building, the cost, how that's financed, etc., or whether it's sold, or whatever the issues are, and then the actual museum itself and its future. So I think that's completely the right process to take. I suppose the only one tiny issue, I thought it was a very good report. It's asking, and I'll come to the recommendations at the end, to give you a mandate. I'm not sure as a committee we can give you a mandate. We are a scrutiny committee. I think we would probably just change that. The officers being asked to consult and test the viability. I know it's wordsmiths, but we are a scrutiny, and I don't think we could give you a mandate when actually that can only really begin by the executive or the council. I know it's only wordsmith, but I'm sure Kimberly can and just change that word, take that one out. But other than that, I think it's a really, really good report. I think it's a really, really sensible way forward. We wish we weren't in this position because it's going to be costly, but we have an asset that's falling apart. So do you let it fall apart and sell it in its current condition, or do you keep it in the correct condition? Difficult decisions, but I think it's good the way we've made progress on this. Councillor Mirrlees, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. When we looked at this before, one of our biggest concerns was the fact that we needed to buy the bricks in November if we were going to save the building, because the bricks had to be made ready for April when the weather was warm, and we've missed several years now of buying these wretched bricks, and I wonder why that hasn't come into the report. The other thing I wanted to ask is Montague Evans, what exactly are they looking at? Are they looking at the building and what we can possibly make out of it in terms of its usage and what it can bring financially to us? Or are they looking at the museum? I'm not quite sure what's happening there. And I, of course, again, we needed the bricks, and I don't know how much Montague Evans is. I'm already not very keen on consultants, I have to be honest. But I just wondered, what are they costing? There's several other questions as well. But meanwhile, yes, I just wanted to know why that hasn't been brought up in terms of, if we're going to save this property, and we were told that it needed this to start happening now, and it looks like it's not. I wondered why that hasn't been put in this report. Thank you.
Probably take either to Kelvin maybe to answer that, or Annie, but Kelvin, do you want to start?
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is we're looking at two things. So at the moment we've split the building from the service and the museum itself. So this report is specifically focused on the collection and the museum service. So that's why there is no sort of reference in essence to the building itself. That is with our estates team, and we do need to come to a quick decision if to order the bricks, and we're hoping that by December we will have a report that looks at all options, and they're all on, and the Montague Evans will be looking at all options, and that is the building, should it stay as a museum? Is that the best service for it? Should it be sold? Are there options if we did have other services that we could use from there? So it was a wide options appraisal that will come back for review for the specific building. But the reality is the council does not at this present moment have £500,000 to press the button on repairing the building. So we need to have an options appraisal that gives us a way forward to justify that expenditure at this present time. One hopes if we can get that decision by December, that work will be able to be carried out in due course. But that is the current challenge we have, £500,000 of funding that we don't have as a council.
Okay, and to be fair, in some ways, the museum part of this issue definitely sits within our overview and scrutiny. There is some, I could certainly think of arguments to say that the financial costs of the building, which actually, if it's not going to be a museum, could probably sit with value for money or housing or somebody else. So I absolutely understand the points that you're making, but I'm not so sure our remit is about the museum, which is likely not to be there. So it's one that Kelvin needs to balance, whether he needs to take some of those issues to a different scrutiny about the finances or the building. So I think we'll keep an overview of it, because I think it's right to. But Kelvin, you may at some stage, and Annie, just have that consideration. Should another scrutiny meeting be looking at the financial side? If it's not a museum, therefore doesn't sit within well-being, it might be value for money or something else. I'll just throw that as a possible consideration.
I think that's a fair comment, but we will keep an oversight of the whole project here as well.
But can I just say,
Kika, come back, please. Yeah.
If we retained that building as a cultural place where we had, I don't know, we came up with all sorts of ideas for having Jane Austen evenings or all sorts of stuff. Surely that would sit within our remit still.
Yeah, yes, it would. But of course, there may be other options put forward that don't fit within the well-being scenario.
Okay.
I don't think there's any limit on what it can be used for, potentially. But if we keep an overview, if we ever feel that actually this is purely something else, then we can either get permission that we continue to look at it and speak to the other committee, or we pass it on. So yes, it may be that, Kika, but it might not be, because none of us know until they've done the work.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Else, we can see you again.
Yeah, sorry, I've had to move location, really bad connection tonight. This particular bit of scrutiny is about the museum, not the building, is my understanding. We've been talking about the building for some years, and the cost of the scaffolding is prohibitive and another issue altogether. But I'm more concerned about the museum and the collection and what's going to happen to that if this building is not sustainable, which it clearly isn't and hasn't been for some years. So my question is, and I have to say that with my previous knowledge as portfolio holder responsible for this, we were talking about this about 3 years ago, 2 years at least. Where are the plans for a relocation of the museum? Are there any plans? Are there any that we can expect in the next few months? Because this building is clearly in terrible, urgent need of being restored or sold, or whatever is decided to do with it. I'm interested in what is going to be happening. So we have the Museum of Farnham options for a new museum service, but I'm not really seeing anything very sort of meaty in this. Will it continue to be managed by Farnham Maltings? You know, what are the plans? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Else. I mean, obviously, I think that does fit in with some of the recommendations. Excuse me, especially recommendation 4 about potential options for the museum service and collection, which they'll then make recommendations to the executive. But I'll allow Kelvin to respond. I think this is the recommendation says that's what we want them to come back with. So, Kelvin.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Else. I think the proposed, this report is seeking that in principle agreement that we look at all the different opportunities that exist for the museum going forward. And what we would look to do, as Charlotte sort of indicated in the introduction, is bring a paper back to you in January that will state what we're going to look at and the remit of that piece of work to look at the museum service. So what I would say is we would want the ONS to have a very strong view into what goes into that piece of that paperwork before we start looking at all the different opportunities that exist, be that alternative locations for the museum or a different type of service. We would like to share that with you before we go out to carry out the work.
Councillor Else, do you want to come back, or is that answered?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, but I fail to see how we can have an opinion if we don't know what the options are. I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, there were options of relocation, etc., and where the collection could be going. I can't see anything of that unless I've missed it. It's not a very long report, so it's unforgivable if I have missed it. But I mean, what exactly are we asked to give our opinions on? I'm just not quite clear on that. If I'm asked, do I think the museum should continue? Absolutely, 100% it should, but I don't know what else I can give an opinion on. I'm sorry.
I think, Councillor Else, you're probably one step ahead. This is one step behind that. This is really taking your view as an ONS committee that you're comfortable with us looking at all those alternative options of different locations, perhaps even a mobile service provision. It's really that step that if you're comfortable with that approach, we will put a piece of work together and report back to you in the new year.
And I would see the recommendations that will come to shortly, 1 to 4, which is on page 42. That gives you that remit to go and do the work, look at the opportunities, the options, the viability of different options, and that agreeing principle to separate the building and the museum, so they're not joined all the time. So I would see it that the recommendations then doing that. I've got 3 hands up. Councillor Wilson first, Councillor Dixon, and Councillor Else, I think, wants to come back.
Thank you, Chairman. I think looking at this, it's something that we have to do, because the alternative is to do nothing, and we can't do nothing. The officers must look into all the options. There's no other way forward. So I think any discussion of this, as Kevin said, it's a first step, and it's a first step that we've got to take. So I don't see any argument against us agreeing to this. Thank you, Chairman.
No, and our role as a scrutiny committee is to allow them to do that work and then scrutinise it with our views, so the executive and council can then make a decision. So it might be sometimes a little bit long-winded, but actually it allows us to do our job. So you're absolutely right, George. Councillor Dixon, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I have to say I'm not really in agreement with everyone at the moment. I mean, I feel that this as someone who lives in Farnham, this is going to feel like a betrayal. And I see where we're going. We're saying like, oh, because of the COVID, we haven't got enough money. So we're doing this study to see what else we can do with the collection, which might be to put it in a mobile van or something. And then, oh, and what are we going to do with the building? Well, let's sell it. And that's where it seems to me that we're going. And that seems to, I think Mrs. Hall, Charlotte said that we were going to bring in consultants to try and give us options for the collection. I would have rather, if we're going to bring consultants in, to bring them in to see if we can get the funding to repair and fund the building as a museum. Last year, or when we first started this project, we had meetings where, as Kika referenced, they said, okay, as a museum, as an artistic centre, we can go out and try and get certain types of funding, not only for the restoration of the building, but then also to develop it. And as you say, become a centre of arts, become a centre of historical relevance. But I think the point is, if we take, okay, we say, fine, the collection is moving somewhere else, so we're left with the building. And then if we then send it to the Value for Money Committee, you know, I think we're on the first step of a very slippery slope here, and a very slippery, very steep slope, which is only going to end in one place, which is the museum somewhere else, the back room of the library, or in a caravan, and the building being sold. And the residents of Farnham, you know, regardless of the COVID, are going to say, we didn't try hard enough to keep that museum in place.
Before, if Kelvin wants to come back, the only thing I would say is our role as an overview and scrutiny is to scrutinise what options are put forward, the costings, and if we don't like or we disagree with the options put forward, then we as a committee will be saying so and go and saying to the executive, we don't have to agree with what Kelvin or Charlotte says. If we disagree,
Well, in that case, I really disagree. I think if
but we have to wait until we need them to produce the options.
Yes, I just don't think if we have the option, Kevin, I really feel that if we're going to bring consult, the point is we know that as we think, we don't know, we think that as an artistic centre, as a museum or a craft centre or a historic centre, it probably stands a better chance of getting funding for the bricks, funding for the restoration, a lot easier than if it's like a standalone empty building without a purpose. Because bodies who Historic England is going to say, oh, like, we give them the money for the bricks, they're going to sell it. But I really think, you know, there's no one else agree with me on this.
I think what I would say, Councillor Dixon, is this is not a report that says we will be splitting the museum service from the building at all. What it will enable us to do is look at every option that is available once we've explored it. We've never explored any other options other than Wilmer House, but we must accept that Wilmer House, you know, a Grade 1 listed building which is beautiful, perhaps is not the ideal place for public access. There's no disabled access to the first floor, to any of the floors, because of its age. You cannot put lifts in. It's very difficult to change. But this is not a report that says we will definitely be moving from museum and the museum Wilmer House. That is not what this is saying. This is saying we will come back to you for your view. The estates that are looking at the options appraised for the building, one of the options will obviously be should it stay as a cultural building for Farnham and stay within public ownership, and that's the decision, and then we'll know where we are. But what we should, I'm just trying to be honest, with regard to funding, we have explored all options so far for funding to try and repair the house, and it's been something that Charlotte and I have worked hard with a group of councillors, and Councillor Else mentioned the length of time this has been going on. It is not something we haven't explored funding options. We will continue to do that, but we're just trying to bring to members' attention that COVID has impacted the funding arena even more so. It was already difficult to get the funding for the bricks, otherwise we would have done this months ago, but it's got even more difficult now because the Arts Council are focusing on saving organisations that are currently closed. We know, we can talk locally of the Maltings, how that has suffered through the COVID pandemic. You know, they are focusing their attention on saving cultural organisations and museums, not necessarily repair. And that's the problem we are currently sitting. So the funding arena has got even harder, even though we've explored lots of options beforehand as well.
Okay, thank you, Kelvin. So I see we've got a new member of our committee. I think the point before I hand over to, I think the Councillor Rubini next would be, Sally, we know there are going to be some difficult decisions, but we will scrutinise what we're given, and it's good that we don't all agree. And I don't think we will agree when we come to this. But until we've got all the options, and it'll be a meeting where we concentrate very much on this issue. If it's in the January meeting, I'd ask Kimberly to put it at the start of the agenda so we don't rush it. We've got the time to discuss it. And, you know, we may agree, we may not agree with those options. So let's keep an open view on it.
Let's not hand it over to another committee until we've absolutely reached our decision, and then yes, hand it to the Valued for Money committee once we've made our decision.
Absolutely. And it may be that even though it may have to go somewhere else, our recommendations will still include what happens to the building. So I don't think we will abdicate that responsibility, but it may be out of courtesy, we bring either somebody else in or we inform them of what we're doing. But it's our, at the moment, this sits with us. It's on our action plan. So we will look at the options and we will give a recommendation, and that may or may not be what Kelvin and Charlotte want. But that's our right as scrutiny. So it's not a done deal. In January, when we hope that we'll get the paper, we'll get it early on the agenda so we can really thrash this out, because it's a big issue for Farnham, it's a big issue for our cultural strategy, and we'll take it from there. So I'll move on. I think Councillor Rabini, Councillor Miralese, and then Councillor Else.
Thanks, Chairman. When I look at this now, I'm not a Farnham person. I may have worked there, but I'm afraid I don't know the community that well. However, I do know Hazelmere and to a certain extent a bit more at Godalming. Now, we all have museums. However, as far as I'm aware, Farnham is probably the only one that we pour so much money in. Now, I'm looking forward to seeing this report by the officers, because what I would like to see is a managed way of trying to keep the building and the museum. However, I don't know whether it's some sort of trust, but perhaps we need to look outside the box to try and find a way that Waverley doesn't have to fund so much money into one particular part of the borough for one museum. I'd like to see a fairer way of dividing that money up, whether it means we have the amount of money we have now and sharing it out amongst them, or whether in fact, as I hope, we find somebody to take the building and then hand it back to us or rent it out, whatever we're going to do, at a cheaper cost than we've got now. That would be my hope, that we come forward with this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And before I hand over to Councillor Miralese, just a point you made about disabled access. I just wonder, as we are the Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee, whether actually we are knowingly committing offences against the Disability Act. So I do think, all I was saying is, can you, as we are the Community Wellbeing Committee, just make sure that we haven't got any liabilities there, and just bring that back in the January's meeting, because that actually could be an important factor, that if we are technically breaking the law, then that may be a factor we need to consider. I don't need a discussion now, Kelvin, but I just think you'd raised it. I think we shouldn't forget that as a committee. Councillor Miralese.
Just to go back to Sally, one of the reasons that they said that it has failed in this report is because the Maltings were never given what they felt was a reasonable length of time in order to develop the museum properly, which is one of the reasons that they felt, because they weren't given a long enough lease, they couldn't actually then put things into position to really develop it, to make it evolve. So I think that's something, Sally, that I wanted to just mention to you if you hadn't seen. But I think there's all sorts, this is not to do with scrutiny, but there's all this in the Landmark Trust and people like that. And I did mention, actually, have you looked at our Waverley assets? Did anybody go and see whether we can plunder any of the assets for all the things that we need, that we no longer want? Because I think that's something that should be looked at. But however, that's something else. Anyway, thank you very much for letting me speak.
No, fine, thank you. Councillor Else, and then we'll go to the recommendation.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's very important that we as a committee understand the history of this situation as well, because if we are going to put forward recommendations, we do need to understand how we've arrived at the point at which we are. This has been going on now for some 2, maybe 3 years, and if it was an easy subject to find an answer to, it would have been found by now. But something has stalled this. It has got stuck, and that can't be refuted, I don't think. The accessibility situation was considered when I had the portfolio, so I know that was considered. It is not an accessible building, and therefore it is probably flies in the face of acceptability anyway for a public amenity. Did look at other venues have been looked at and were examined. The Maltings itself, the Pump House, I think, the Wharf Carport Park, there's a building there. It has all been, this is like Groundhog Day for me. And I think the history needs to be understood. The officers have put in countless hours in this situation. I don't know why it's not been solved by now. It hasn't, but I don't know why. I'd like to know why. We were having the same discussions 2 years ago. I said, if somebody's got an answer to this or some options, some answers, let's look at them. Whatever we do, we must understand the cost of it all. And that is going to be the absolute bottom line, how much it will cost. And that is what was holding us back 2 or 3 years ago, and I suspect that is what will hold us back now. So before we have any options, we need to know what the cost implications are. Very important point, what the accessibility implications are, and then we can probably look at making a decision about which options we might support. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that, Jenny. And I think that, some good points have been made there, and that's why we put it on our work programme so it didn't fall between the cracks, and it got the time and effort and the commitment by the council to do something with it. I have to admit, I think if we hadn't, it might have fallen through and we wouldn't be where we are today. Absolutely, any options put forward must have a financial appraisal, because as a committee, we can't scrutinise a decision if we don't know what the costs are, what the implications are. So if a report comes to us for the next meeting and it doesn't include that, then we won't be discussing it because we can't make valid recommendations then. I think we probably, unless there's a new point, I'll Councillor Dixon, and then we'll go to recommendations because I'm conscious of the time. Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, I'd just like to come. I'm sorry. I hear what Jenny's saying about money, but we need to have a vision as well. And she's talking about historic time. Well, maybe one thing to mention in our recent history was the changing of the political colours within the Waverley Borough Council, and why have a large number of Farnham in residence independent candidates arrived in Waverley. And the reason was, a lot of it is to do with dismay from Farnham residents, seeing this historic building crumbling before their eyes. I'm
not sure getting
I know this is not the point, but the point,
political discussion.
No, I'm not trying to say that, but
point of order. Thank you, Chairman.
This is about, and actually the people who've been pushing this in the last couple of years of not necessarily been Farnham councillors. This is a non-political, non-geographical issue which has been pushed by people from other parts of Waverley.
Okay, I see what you're saying, Kevin, but I do say that if we are going to look at this on the basis of cost, the answer is always going to be the same. We're not going to. Yes, if we're going to make it by cost.
It will be a decision for the council, I would guess, because the amount of money involved. So what we will do is we will put recommendations from the overview and scrutiny to the executive. The executive and the managers will put their report together, which I guess will come to council sometime in the summer. It will be a council decision. We may have recommendations which will be based on health and well-being, but it will be a council decision. And I think we have to judge, the 57 councillors to make the right decision based on the information put forward. So it has nothing to do with anything else other than what is best for the council and is best for the museum. Okay, and if there's no other points, I would like to go to the recommendations. If you've got your papers, it's on page 42. I won't read them out because I think everybody looking across seems to have their papers. I think we will just slightly change recommendation to agree that the officers explore, consult and test. We can't give them a mandate because we're not able to do that. So with that slight amendment to recommendation 2, are you happy that we take all 4 on block to agree? Does everyone agree with them? Anybody not?
Agree.
Okay. Sally, did you want to abstain or?
No, I'll agree, because you said to me on the basis that you've said that we will, this is not a decision, we're continuing to discuss this. That's what I've understood from tonight.
Yeah, this now I think is the actual very start of it being pulled together.
Yep. Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, so we've agreed the 4, so we'll move on. Thank you, everybody. We'll go to number 10, which is the draft corporate strategy. Louise, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So since the last time the strategy came to this committee and it was taken to a couple of member workshops, we've received comments back, and you'll see that the revised corporate strategy has changed quite a lot since the first time you saw it. I'd like to sort of echo a comment actually that was made last week at ONS at Environment by one of the councillors there, to say this is a high-level document. Bearing in mind that the council runs over 100 services, there's no way we can sort of reflect everything that the council does. What we want to sort of make sure in here is that we reflect the strategic priorities, which we've got there, and we give the actions underneath those main objectives. But sitting underneath there is an awful lot more work that the council does, which I'm sure you all appreciate. There are other strategies, there are other action plans that will sit beneath this to sort of give a real flavour of what the council does and what the council intends to do and its objectives for the next few years. So the action plan that will sit underneath this, the proof is in the pudding. So you will be interested in what the performance is, because we've talked about this in the past and how smart it is. And there will be an action plan sitting underneath this with more detail, with more smart targets, and that performance will be brought back to all of the ONS committees each quarter to see how that progress is happening. So I don't really want to sort of dwell on any more detail in here, but I'm very happy to take further comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. I know this has been discussed in numerous meetings, and you obviously either saw my scribbles or you guessed what I was going to say, and you've raised it. You know, all of these strategies are great, but you need action plans with objectives, you know, targets, you know, how you're going to do that, etc., etc. And I think, to me, I think if that in time will come out, you know, I'd be far more satisfied, because often they read really well, but you can't see how they're going to be delivered, and it's just a document. So I won't go through my thing about smart objectives, so I'll wind that one up. Now, we did raise the issue on page 6 of that document, which is page 56, where we talked about loneliness and poor mental health. And I can't remember if it was Councillor Dixon, but I know we raised the issue about mental health, and did we think it was strong enough? Because it's a real issue, and especially with COVID-19, it's become even more relevant. I'm happy for other committee members to chip in on that one, but I'll open it up for views on this document.
Councillor Forachevsky, Chairman.
Councillor Forachevsky, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it was Councillor Dixon who mentioned about mental health, and rightly so. I was utterly delighted to see that it's been incorporated on the scrutiny tracker for 2020-21. Especially, you know, we don't like to say the word suicide, but suicide is prevalent across the country, and it is the single biggest killer in men under 50. So I think we can shy away from it as much as we want, but it's real and it's out there, and it's taking more deaths than COVID. And it's not just male mental health, it's all everyone's mental health. And I think the report is good, and I'm pleased to see that there's been changes made to the strategy, but I would like to see a more robust strengthening of this to show that it pays attention and it puts it at the top of the agenda. Because I think going through COVID, coming out the other side, we are going to really start to see the impact it has had. And I think coming up to Christmas, we'll see people behaving in a very different way to the way they behaved before. It's just not going to be the same because people are worried and they're scared, and it will impact in a variety of different ways. So I would really like to see Waverley get behind the initiative of the strategy to put mental health at the top of the agenda, because that's going to be the real key in all of this, is how we actually emerge from it. But having said that, I'm absolutely delighted to see it on the scrutiny tracker, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I know about this from my time as mayor. There is a strategy out there we can adopt here and now. We've just got to implement it. We've got to signpost it to those who need it. But I'm just pleased to see that it's there, and we just need to keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And what I would mention as well, the HR manager, who's done some great work and put some great emails out there regarding mental health and caring for staff, and putting on workshops and various bits and pieces. So great piece of work that's going on. Let's not lose the momentum and keep it going, but let's make it really, really robust in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for those wise words. And I think it's right, Louise. You know, I wonder whether we need to put suicide prevention. There's lots and lots of work. I think it's something that the council unanimously would support. You know, it's a very, very minor, but I think it shows a real commitment from us as a council on that. And as Mary said, there is lots and lots of work out there. We haven't got to, we haven't got to reinvent the wheel. We're just going to rebadge it to suit our borough. So if we could add that in. Councillor else has got a hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. I repeat what I said before. I don't see anything in this strategy, and strategy, by the way, is a plan of action, supposed to be. I don't see much action either. I see a wish list still, so I'm sorry, but I do maintain that view with regard to this. I see no mention at all about protection, about safety, not in any real sense. And as I said and have said before, we are living in a different world than we were some years ago. We're on a severe level for terrorist attack, and we have the COVID to deal with. And I would like to think that our council was engaging really seriously with those issues. I don't see it because they're here for a long time yet. This is not just a couple of months. This is going to be for some time yet. So I would like to see much more, and I can't really sign up to a strategy which, as I say, doesn't actually spell out a plan. It just says what we would like to do. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I'm sure Louise is scribbling away and writing those comments to take them into account. Anybody else who wishes to make a comment, or we'll move on to that recommendation with the points that we've raised? Okay, Louise, do you want to just come back before we?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on the discussion throughout the evening about mental health and suicide, and wondering whether it's something that we can put on our forward plan explicitly, about whether that's me or the new scrutiny officer going away and doing some research and bringing it back to the committee to sort of formulate what you'd like, or whether we get some experts in from whether it's public health or mental health teams to sort of do a presentation, because quite understandably it is rising to the top of everybody's agenda, particularly with COVID and mental health of young people as well as old people being affected during this time. So I just wonder whether you wanted to sort of think about putting something explicit on your work programme, and we could bring something back next in the new year.
Councillor Wojciechowski, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. And can I just say that's exactly very wise words and a brilliant way to take this forward. Can I give you just a little insight into some of the work that I've done during my year as Mayor, which is, many of you will be aware, was to do a networking event, and Louise as well was a very big part of that. And what we actually found out there is there's a lot of organisations doing an awful lot of work, all repeating it, but not talking to each other. And we found several organisations, and I think Louise's point there about getting it on the top of the agenda and having it something that's there for us to all look at and study is absolutely excellent. And I think we still, unfortunately, we weren't able to continue, we weren't able to go ahead with our networking event, but there's a lot of information already out there that exists that tells people about the community, about the organisations within Waverley who are already doing things now. I referred earlier as well to social media, and I think we can, as councillors who've got Facebook accounts, we can push all this through our social medias to make sure that anyone out there who is weak, vulnerable and in need, and let's face it, mental health isn't selective. 1 in 3 of us will suffer at some point in our life. 1 in 2 of us, it's as low as 1 in 2. 1 in 2 of us. So it's not something that's going to go, and COVID's not going to go away. There's going to be a fallout for a long time to come. People losing their jobs, people not being able to be communicating the same way as they were before. So exactly, the point that our officer has just made is an excellent one, and I think it should be endorsed by this committee and full council. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Louise. It's a good suggestion. We'll put it on our work programme. I'm sure when we come to discuss it in the meeting, we'll look for the experience from Councillor Wojciechowski from her year as the Mayor, and we'll look at whether we need to keep them separate or as a one strategy. I have no views at the moment, but if we put that on our work programme, then we know that we will be discussing it further, and we'll work out a plan and how we take it forward and what we actually want to do and achieve. Is it to have a strategy? Is it about communication? Is it a combination of a number of issues? So we'll do that if you're happy with that, Louise, to do that.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay.
Councillor Dixon's got a hand up, Chair.
All right. I didn't see Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, I apologise. As Mary, I haven't been on this committee for very long, so I just wanted to ask one question. One of the things that I was quite enthusiastic about earlier in the year was that when we were talking about the future, the executive was talking about building social housing and builds as part of our long-term financial plan. Now, I don't know whether or not does anyone else remember that? Anyway, I don't know whether or not that should be in this strategy. But at the moment, the financial management section is very light, really. It's just it's just saying that we're going to have our finances are hit, and it doesn't mention our long-term goal to build to carry forward those strategies that we talked about last. Should this be in this document, or is it missing from this document? That's what I'm trying to ask. Thank you.
I think you've made a valid point, and again, I'm sure Louise can look at that to see whether it needs strengthening and whether it actually explains what the vision is or not. Could you consider that for us, Louise?
Yes. Can I just sort of be absolutely clear? So for Councillor Dixon, to make sure I've got the comment here. So under good quality housing, for example, in that section on page 49. So we've got, and Andrew, I think, is still on the committee here. So we allude to the sort of new housing strategy to ensure that we've got the right homes for people in the right places, and that we're meeting housing needs. Is there something else? And there's some other comments about the fact that we need to ensure that our houses are safe and warm and
yeah. No, what I was referring to, Louise, and I'm not sure this should be in this document because it's only a strategy document, but when we went through the council's budget at the beginning of the year, they said, okay, we're going to have a deficit of so much and we need to have a strategy for trying to rebuild our finances. And we said, okay, we could invest in commercial properties, we can invest in leisure centres, but the decision was taken by the executive to invest in housing and which was going to be social housing, and that was we were going to build houses and rent them with a view to trying to improve the overall finances of Waverley. And I don't know, should that be in this strategy document because this is meant to be strategy 2020-25. It's not mentioned in here. Should it be, or is not? As I say, I'm not sure.
Let me take that one away, because it might be in here without being explicit. So I'll tell you what, I'll take that away and I'll come back to you offline on that one. That's all right.
Thank you for raising that, Sally. You're absolutely right. If it's not explicit, then the document just needs to be explicit, because you're absolutely right. It doesn't match what the aspirations and the vision and where the council wants to go. So Louise can take that offline and just ping you an email. Okay, if I can, everybody, just turn to page 47, which is the one recommendation which was considered a revised strategy, and make any recommendations to the executive as appropriate. We've made our recommendations to Louise on behalf of the executive, so you can see what's relevant and how it can be worded. Is everybody happy with our thoughts on this as the next stage? Yep, thank you, everybody. Right, we've only got a couple of minutes, so I should move very, very quickly on to item 11, which is the Service Level Agreement Working Group. Councillor Ellis, I don't know if you want to, we've still got you, if you want to start this one off.
Yes, thank you. Well, I don't have it because nothing, as far as I'm concerned, officially has happened. I haven't been able to have another meeting with the working group. I don't know officially what the position is, although I understand that the second tranche of SLA payments are being made in full to the organisations that have been expecting them up until the end of March, but that's not official. I haven't had that officially relayed to me at all as chairman of the working group looking at the SLAs. What the position is going to be in the future for the year from April onwards next year, I have no idea. I haven't been informed about any budget that might be made available, and we haven't had any further conversations. I do think that, to be fair to officers, with this new lockdown and the level of input that they are redeployed with to look after our vulnerable residents, that maybe that's where the officer time has actually had to be redirected. So that isn't too much of an issue, but I'm afraid I don't have an update to give you whatsoever. And it's not for want of trying, but I think we're victims of circumstance here with respect to officer time being given to us as a working group. So I'm not complaining about that at all, although I do feel unhappy that a decision has been made by our executive and portfolio holders that hasn't been actually relayed to me as representative of this overview and scrutiny committee. I don't feel very happy about that at all, but I have made that known, and I do feel that we should be kept fully informed about every decision with regard to SLAs that are made. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you for raising that point. I can see Annie still survived the meeting, so she would have heard those comments. Absolutely agree. If members of this committee are putting their own time, effort and commitment into something and maybe not being updated, I think that is a shame. It undervalues the role of scrutiny. I can just put a plea into those listening, Annie, Kelvin and the rest of the senior management team, Andrew, you know, if there's things that affect members of this group who are doing lots of good work, let's make sure they're kept involved, because otherwise it's pointless us scrutinising and putting our time and effort into it. I'll say no more. Councillor Rubini, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm on that working group and we haven't met. We heard about the interim payments, which obviously, as Hazemere representative, I was pleased with. However, we've got a full year coming up, and I really feel that the people concerned, all those community organisations, will want to know through the SLAs what they're going to do next year for their money. I know at Hazemere they've got to start making plans about getting extra funding outside, but it's very difficult when you don't know what you're going to receive through your SLA. So somehow we need to get these talks going again so we can actually start to formulate a plan for next year so that we can look at it and see whether those are in fact the right plans to go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's fair to say I've actually received a phone call from the day centre in Milford asking me what information is going to be required, you know, all issues such as that. And, you know, I wasn't in a position to answer that at all. I just said they need to speak to whoever's got the grants. I'm not sure if anybody knows whose portfolio has the grants. Annie, have you got any idea?
All I was going to say is I did speak earlier this evening to Councillor Els about where we were with SLAs. No real decisions have been made other than to pay the second half of the year's grants. As you know, we've got a very, very difficult financial position, and we're considering the grants as part of the medium-term financial plan over the next couple of months. And I'll feed back to the executive that Councillor Els would like some input into that process. But there have been no real decisions made on it. I think everybody understands just how difficult the positions are. We've also had to take into account the actual individual organisations and the positions they're in. Have they taken furlough payments? Because it's quite difficult for us to fund them when they're not working and they've taken furlough payments. It's quite difficult with public money, and we need to be accountable, and we need to be transparent with how we've done that funding and how we've distributed it. So I think we need to work that through going forward into the medium-term financial plan, which we'll set through to the budget in February.
No,
Very much appreciate the amount of time people put into this, and you know, and the views, and we really value the people out there in the community, the volunteers who are putting all the time in.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Everything you said. Like I say, the contact I had was asking about, well, what's happening? I have no idea what information is being required. We're required by the Charities Commission to hold so much in our bank account. Is that going to go against us? So there is a lot of unease. Absolutely understand the decisions will be extremely difficult because some are going to win and some are not going to win because of their current position. And, you know, if they've been open throughout the summer and have been providing services, then they should be supported that little bit more for those who've closed and taken the money. So absolutely, I don't think there's anybody here who would disagree. The only thing I would say is, you know, the work Councillor Els has done in relation to SLAs, which is the best way of doing it, it seems that should run alongside to work with those decisions to make sure. So absolutely agree with what you say, but I'll still go back. I think we just make sure this committee's kept involved. Councillor Els, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me come back. I just wanted to say that I understand that the working group aren't looking at which SLA should be afforded to which organisation. That is not our purpose. Our purpose is whether SLAs are the best way to be funding our volunteer and other organisations like CAB and Hopper, etc., which aren't entirely voluntary. So that's our remit. It's not which organisations get what. That's not ever anything that we've been tasked with considering. It's purely the role of SLAs in general as a way of funding those organisations. So that's just, you know, something that people need to keep clear in their minds, I think. But nonetheless, I absolutely echo and appreciate your comments that we do need to be kept informed, fully informed, I think, about every decision that is made by our executive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. You're right, we don't make the decisions. It's just we were scrutinising the process and whether it's the most effective way. And I think as long as we keep to that and we don't stray, then it's a valuable piece of work. I know we've had these conversations with Andrew and Kelvin in the past, so it's nothing new. Okay, we are 7 minutes over. Is there anything else on that item people want to raise? George.
Sorry, my mute's funny. I just want to say that as a representative on one of the recipients of SLAs, I have been kept in the picture. I was given a letter today, or sent an email of a letter that is going to the chair of the SLA. And I think at the moment it's an information gathering exercise, asking for what they've done, what their budgets are and the rest of it. And I think we should give the officers a bit more time in this particular occasion because of the other jobs they're doing. But I find that the information I get is fine, and I would presume this happens to all other members who are representing the council and their SLAs. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Obviously, there are some time constraints because I think the next lot of payments will be April, if I'm right. So, you know, decisions have to be made about processes and amounts, you know, because they need to be operating from April with those revised figures. So, yes, they've got some time, but it's not that much time when you take Christmas out. So, right, I think we'll move on because I say I don't like being late and we're 9 minutes over, so that's unacceptable. Has anybody got any other absolutely burning issue? Otherwise, we'll move on to the last item and stop. Nobody put their hands up, so I'll be quick on that. Can I thank everybody for your discussions? Again, there's been some meaty topics that we're slowly getting through. I do appreciate your time and commitment, and to the officers, Louise, Kimberly and the rest for the work you do for all this as well. Have a good evening. Escape while we're on a roll. So thank you, everybody. Cheers.